Against consequentialism. Consequentialism as a moral theory asserts that the rightness or wrongness of an action is determined solely by its consequences. At first glance, this seems both intuitive and practical. After all, it aligns with the common sense notion that we should act in ways that produce the best outcomes. However, upon closer examination, this framework encounters profound philosophical and practical challenges. Central among these is the inherent unpredictability of consequences, especially within complex systems characterized by computational irreducibility, the limitations of human cognition, and the subjective valuation of outcomes. This essay argues that due to these factors, consequentialism is fundamentally flawed as a comprehensive moral theory. 1. The foundation of consequentialism and its intuitive appeal. Consequentialism's appeal lies in its straightforward premise. Actions are morally right if they lead to good consequences and morally wrong if they lead to bad ones. This outcome-oriented approach resonates with our desire to make decisions that positively impact ourselves and others. It seems to offer a flexible and situational ethic, adapting to the complexities of real-life scenarios. Moreover, consequentialism aligns with utilitarian principles, which aim to maximize overall happiness or utility. By focusing on the results of actions, it promises a pragmatic method for ethical decision-making that can be applied across diverse contexts. 2. The challenge of predicting consequences. Despite its intuitive appeal, consequentialism relies heavily on the ability to predict the outcomes of our actions accurately. This reliance poses a significant problem because, in many cases, the consequences of actions, especially in complex systems, are inherently unpredictable. 2.1. Computational irreducibility and complex systems. Computational irreducibility is a concept describing systems where the only way to determine their future state is to simulate every step of their evolution. There is no shortcut or analytical method to predict the outcome without running the complete process. Stephen Wolfram, in his work on cellular automata and computational theory, popularized this concept, although its roots can be traced to earlier studies in complexity and chaos theory. An illustrative example is Conway's Game of Life, a cellular automaton consisting of a grid of cells that evolve based on simple deterministic rules. Despite the simplicity of these rules, predicting the state of the system at a future point requires computing each prior state. Small changes in the initial configuration can lead to vastly different outcomes, a hallmark of chaotic systems. This unpredictability is not limited to abstract models but is prevalent in many natural and social systems. Weather patterns. Meteorologists can forecast weather with reasonable accuracy in the short term. However, due to the chaotic nature of the atmosphere, long-term predictions become unreliable. Tiny variations in initial conditions, so small they might be undetectable, can lead to dramatically different weather outcomes, exemplifying the butterfly effect. Financial markets. Stock prices and market trends by a multitude of factors, including investor sentiment, global events, and economic indicators. Predicting market movements is notoriously difficult, as unforeseen events can trigger significant fluctuations. Ecosystems. Biological systems are interdependent and sensitive to changes. Introducing or removing a species can have cascading effects that are challenging to predict in full. Social dynamics. Societal changes often result from complex interactions between individuals, institutions, and cultural norms. Movements like the Arab Spring or the spread of viral content on social media illustrate how unpredictable collective behavior can be. These systems exhibit computational irreducibility because their future states cannot be deduced without step-by-step simulation. This characteristic severely limits our ability to foresee the consequences of actions within such systems. Hash number 2.2, the limits of modeling and prediction, epistemic and aleatoric uncertainty. In attempting to predict outcomes within complex systems, we encounter two fundamental types of uncertainty, epistemic and aleatoric. Epistemic uncertainty arises from a lack of knowledge. It reflects limitations in our understanding of the system, measurement errors, or incomplete data. This type of uncertainty can, in principle, be reduced with better information, improved models, or more precise measurements. Aleatoric uncertainty represents inherent randomness or variability within the system. It is intrinsic to the process and cannot be reduced by acquiring more information. In open systems, interactions with the external environment introduce aleatoric uncertainty because the system is influenced by factors that are inherently unpredictable. When dealing with open systems, the environment can introduce random fluctuations and events that are impossible to foresee. For example, in weather forecasting, sudden volcanic eruptions or unexpected solar activity can impact atmospheric conditions unpredictably. In ecological systems, random mutations or stochastic events like wildfires can alter species dynamics in unforeseen ways. In social systems, spontaneous human behaviors or emergent cultural shifts can drastically change societal trends without prior indication. Aleatoric uncertainty adds a layer of unknowability to the system's behavior. Even with perfect knowledge of the system's internal state, the inherent randomness introduced by external interactions limits our ability to predict future outcomes. This type of uncertainty is particularly challenging because it is not reducible through better modeling or data collection. These uncertainties underscore the limitations of modeling and prediction in complex open systems. They highlight that beyond computational irreducibility, there are fundamental barriers to knowability due to both our incomplete understanding and the intrinsic randomness of the world. Haber 3. Unbounded agents and the amplification of consequences. In today's interconnected world, individuals and organizations act as unbounded agents within a global network. Their actions can have far-reaching effects that transcend physical, temporal, and cultural boundaries. 3.1. Global connectivity and information flow. The advent of the internet and global communication technologies has dramatically increased the speed and reach of information dissemination. A message posted on social media can be viewed by millions worldwide within minutes. This rapid spread means that actions taken in one part of the world can influence events elsewhere in unforeseen ways. For example, financial decisions. An investment decision by a major corporation can affect global markets, influencing economies in distant countries. Political movements. Social media campaigns can inspire protests or policy changes across the globe. Cultural trends. A viral video or meme can shape public opinion and cultural norms internationally. The high degree of connectivity means that the consequences of actions are not confined to local environments, but can propagate globally. This interconnectedness amplifies the unpredictability of outcomes, as the complex web of interactions makes it impossible to anticipate all potential effects. Moreover, the influence of unbounded agents is not limited by physical proximity or immediate relationships. Consider the following example: astronomical observations and unbounded timescales. Suppose a group of scientists is planning to celebrate the observation of a supernova, a star explosion occurring 1 million light years away. The exact moment they pop the cork on their champagne depends on when the light from that supernova reaches Earth. Predicting this event requires not only understanding the timing of the supernova explosion, but also accounting for the vast distances and the speed of light. The supernova's occurrence is an event outside our control and knowledge until its light arrives. Thus, to predict when the scientists will celebrate, one would need to predict an event that happened 1 million years ago, highlighting the functionally unbounded time and distance involved. This example illustrates how actions and reactions can be influenced by events occurring across vast temporal and spatial scales, further complicating our ability to predict consequences. As global connectivity increases, the complexity and unpredictability of interactions among unbounded agents grow. Small actions can have amplified effects due to the interconnected nature of modern systems, making the prediction of consequences exceedingly difficult. 4. The philosophical problem with diminishing future weights. To address the challenge of unpredictability, some consequentialists suggest diminishing the weight of future consequences in moral evaluations. This approach mirrors practical decision-making in economics and policy, where future benefits or costs are discounted due to uncertainty and time preference. However, this practice raises philosophical concerns within the consequentialist framework. 4.1. The amplification of effects over time. While uncertainty about future consequences increases with time, so does the potential impact of those consequences. Due to the butterfly effect, small actions today can lead to significant outcomes in the future. For example, a minor policy change might set in motion social dynamics that result in major societal shifts decades later. Discounting future consequences might cause us to overlook actions that have profound long-term implications. From a consequentialist standpoint, all consequences, regardless of when they occur, should be considered in moral evaluations. 4.2. Arbitrary temporal boundaries. Applying diminishing weights introduces an arbitrary cutoff in considering consequences. Philosophically, this conflicts with the impartiality that consequentialism aspires to uphold. If the moral value of an outcome depends solely on its consequence, the timing of that consequence should not diminish its significance. Moreover, deciding how much to discount future consequences lacks an objective basis. Different individuals or societies might apply different discount rates, leading to inconsistent moral judgments. 4.3. Practicality versus philosophical consistency. While discounting future consequences might be practical for decision-making under uncertainty, it compromises the philosophical integrity of consequentialism. It introduces an element of temporal bias, favoring immediate outcomes over future ones without a principled justification within the theory. Consequentialism, as a moral theory, requires that all consequences be weighed impartially. Introducing diminishing weights undermines this requirement and highlights the theory's inability to accommodate the practical realities of decision-making in uncertain conditions. 5. Subjectivity in the valuation of consequences. Consequentialism assumes that the value of consequences can be objectively assessed. However, in practice, the valuation of outcomes is often subjective, influenced by individual beliefs, cultural backgrounds, and ethical frameworks. 5.1. Divergent value systems. Different people and cultures assign different values to the same outcomes. For example, economic policies. A policy that promotes economic growth might be valued highly in a capitalist society, but critiqued in a community that prioritizes environmental conservation or social equity. Technological advancements. Innovations like genetic engineering may be seen as progress by some, but as ethically problematic by others due to concerns about playing God or unforeseen consequences. 5.2. The church fire example. Consider the case of a church fire. For believers, the loss of a church is a profound tragedy. The building may hold sacred significance, serving as a place of worship, community gathering, and spiritual solace. Its destruction represents not just a material loss, but a deep spiritual wound. Secular perspective. An atheist might view the fire primarily in terms of historical and cultural loss or the economic cost of rebuilding. The spiritual significance may not factor into their valuation of the consequence. This divergence illustrates how the same event can have vastly different moral weights for different individuals. Consequentialism struggles to accommodate these subjective valuations within a single framework for moral judgment. 5.3. The absence of an objective standard. Without an objective standard for valuing consequences, consequentialist evaluations become inconsistent and culturally relative. This subjectivity undermines the universality that consequentialism aims to achieve, as moral judgments vary based on individual or collective perspectives. 6. The time asymmetry problem, hindsight bias, and unknowables. Our perception of causality is influenced by the time asymmetry problem, the difference in how we experience and interpret past and future events. Hindsight bias and simplified narratives. In retrospect, events often seem inevitable. We construct narratives that make sense of the past, linking actions to outcomes in a coherent story. This process is influenced by hindsight bias, where we overestimate our ability to have predicted events after they have occurred. These narratives are typically simplified, omitting the complex web of factors and alternative possibilities that existed. We focus on key events and decisions, attributing causality in a way that fits our understanding or moral framework. 6.2. Ignoring counterfactuals and unknowables. When analyzing past events, we tend to ignore counterfactuals, the what-ifs that could have led to different outcomes. This omission reinforces the perception that the actual outcome was the only plausible result, further solidifying our belief in predictable causality. Moreover, There are factors from the past that remain unknowable because they were not documented or their evidence has been lost or destroyed. These unknown variables may have had significant impacts on historical events, but their absence from the record means they are invisible in our analyses. For example, archaeological mysteries. Entire civilizations, such as the Indus Valley Civilization or the Maya, left behind limited records. Critical factors leading to their decline, like natural disasters, diseases, or social upheavals, may remain unknown due to the lack of evidence. Lost contributions. The achievements of marginalized groups or individuals might be underrepresented or absent in historical accounts, skewing our understanding of societal developments. Destroyed records. Events like the burning of the Library of Alexandria resulted in the loss of vast amounts of knowledge. The absence of this information affects our comprehension of historical progress and influences. The existence of unknowable past factors highlights the limitations of our retrospective analyses. If we cannot fully understand all the causes that led to past events, our confidence in tracing clear lines of causality is misplaced. 6.3. The misapplication to future predictions. This retrospective clarity does not translate to predictive accuracy. The belief that we can predict future consequences based on our understanding of past causality is misleading. In reality, the future is shaped by countless variables and potentialities that cannot be fully accounted for. Historians and social scientists recognize the extreme contingency and multi-causality of events. Significant historical developments often result from a confluence of factors, many of which are only identifiable in hindsight or remain unknown due to lost evidence. Consequentialism's reliance on predicting future outcomes fails to account for this complexity and the limitations of our foresight. If our understanding of the past is incomplete and shaped by unknowables, our predictions about the future are even more precarious. Number 7. Cognitive limitations and biases in decision-making. Human cognition is subject to various biases and limitations that impair our ability to accurately predict consequences. 7.1. Confirmation bias. Confirmation bias leads us to favor information that confirms our existing beliefs and disregard evidence that contradicts them. This bias affects how we gather, interpret, and recall information. In the context of consequentialism, confirmation bias can distort our assessment of potential outcomes. Policy decisions. Decision-makers may selectively consider data that supports their preferred policy, ignoring potential negative consequences. Scientific research. Researchers might unconsciously design experiments or interpret results in ways that confirm their hypotheses. 7.2. Overconfidence effect. The overconfidence effect causes individuals to overestimate the accuracy of their judgments and predictions. This overconfidence can lead to underestimating risks and overvaluing the likelihood of desired outcomes. 7.3. Framing effects. Framing effects occur when the way information is presented influences decision-making. The same consequence can be perceived differently depending on its framing. Gain versus loss. People tend to prefer options framed as gains rather than equivalent options framed as losses. Risk assessment. The presentation of probabilities can alter risk perceptions, affecting choices. These cognitive biases undermine the reliability of our predictions and consequently the consequentialist approach to moral evaluation. 8. The infeasibility of comprehensive consequential evaluation. Given the unpredictability of complex systems, the subjectivity in valuing outcomes, and cognitive limitations, it becomes impractical to comprehensively evaluate all potential consequences of an action. 8.1. Infinite consequence chains. Every action can set off a chain of events extending indefinitely into the future. Attempting to consider all possible outcomes leads to an infinite regress, making complete evaluation impossible. For example, a simple gesture. Giving a compliment to a stranger might boost their mood, influencing their interactions with others, potentially affecting countless subsequent events. 8.2. Decision paralysis and arbitrary cutoffs. Faced with the impossibility of evaluating infinite consequences, we might experience decision paralysis. The overwhelming scope of potential outcomes can hinder decision-making. Set arbitrary cutoffs. To make evaluation manageable, we might limit consideration to immediate or foreseeable consequences, introducing arbitrariness into moral judgment. Neither approach aligns with the consequentialist principle of assessing actions based on all their consequences. 9. Alternative ethical frameworks. The challenges confronting consequentialism suggest the need to consider alternative ethical frameworks that do not rely solely on the predictability of consequences. 9.1 Deontological ethics. Deontological ethics focuses on the inherent rightness or wrongness of actions based on adherence to moral duties or rules. Actions are judged by whether they comply with ethical principles, regardless of the outcomes. Advantages: clarity, provides clear guidelines for action based on moral laws. Consistency, actions are evaluated based on principles, not variable outcomes. Limitations: rigidity, may not accommodate exceptional circumstances where breaking a rule could lead to better outcomes. Conflicting duties, situations may arise where moral duties conflict, requiring further principles to resolve. Sonnet 9.2 Virtue ethics. Virtue ethics emphasizes the development of moral character and virtues such as honesty, courage, and compassion. The focus is on being a good person rather than solely on the morality of individual actions. Advantages: holistic approach, encourages personal growth and ethical behavior across all aspects of life. Adaptability, allows for context-sensitive judgment based on cultivated virtues. Limitations: subjectivity, definitions of virtues may vary between cultures and individuals. Guidance, may provide less concrete direction in specific moral dilemmas. 9.3 Pragmatic ethics. Pragmatic ethics advocates for flexible principles that adapt to new information and changing circumstances. It acknowledges the complexities of moral decision-making and the limitations of human knowledge. Advantages: flexibility, accommodates uncertainty and evolving understanding. Practicality, focuses on workable solutions rather than idealized principles. Limitations: lack of firm principles, may be criticized for lacking a stable moral foundation. Risk of relativism, without firm guidelines, moral judgments may become too fluid. Chapter 10. Reconciling ethics with uncertainty. Recognizing the inherent unpredictability of consequences and the limitations of human cognition does not absolve us of moral responsibility. Instead, it calls for an ethical approach that acknowledges uncertainty, accepts that we cannot foresee all outcomes, and that our knowledge is limited, focuses on intentions and principles, emphasizes acting in accordance with ethical principles and good intentions rather than solely on predicted outcomes. Cultivates virtue, encourages the development of moral character to guide behavior in complex situations. Promotes reflective equilibrium, seeks a balance between moral principles, judgments, and the practical realities of the world. By adopting an ethical framework that accommodates uncertainty, we can make moral decisions that are both principled and practical. 11. Conclusion. Consequentialism, while appealing in its simplicity and focus on outcomes, is fundamentally challenged by the inherent unpredictability of consequences. The limitations imposed by computational irreducibility, the complexity of unbounded agents in a globally connected world, and the cognitive biases that distort our judgment make it impractical to base moral evaluations solely on predicted outcomes. Moreover, the subjective nature of valuing consequences and the philosophical issues with discounting future outcomes further undermine consequentialism as a comprehensive moral theory. Alternative ethical frameworks such as deontological ethics, virtue ethics, and pragmatic ethics offer more robust approaches that do not depend exclusively on our ability to predict the future. These frameworks emphasize principles, character, and adaptability, providing guidance that is both morally sound and practically applicable. In acknowledging the unknowability of consequences, we accept the limitations of our predictive capabilities and the complexity of the world we inhabit. This acceptance does not lead to moral nihilism, but rather to a more nuanced and responsible approach to ethics, one that is grounded in principles, informed by virtues, and responsive to the realities of human cognition and social dynamics. By shifting our focus from uncertain outcomes to the quality of our actions and the character we cultivate, we can navigate moral challenges with greater clarity and integrity. This approach allows us to act ethically in a complex world where the consequences of our actions are often beyond our comprehension.